Welcome to the instructional video entitled Speed Without Briefs. Often we hear that a picture is worth 1,000 words. I am going to show you a picture that I believe will enlighten you and make clear the true relationship of briefs as pertain to steno speed. So let this tower here represent 225 words a minute. So our speed starts way down here, but as we progress we work our way up, and hopefully we can get our speed to this tower of 225 words a minute. Now, as I've taught before, speed is composed of exactly and only two things. One, how fast you move your fingers. But two, how many strokes you write. Or, phrased another way, how many briefs you use. So, in order to get to this 225 words a minute, I'm going to use these big books to represent how many strokes per second you can write. And so, this first book is being able to write 1 stroke per second, or about 60 strokes in a minute. Now, you may recall from some of my other videos that I have taught that 3.0 strokes per second is about the speed of a fairly fast student when they're almost graduating, but they've got a little ways to go, depending on what theory they're using. 3 strokes a second is really good because that's 180 strokes in a minute. And then I've taught that 3.5 strokes a second is a professional court reporter speed, a comfortable speed for a professional court reporter. And then 4 strokes a second is a fast court reporter. The court reporter can really move. 4 strokes a second, that's 240 strokes in a minute. Then there's 4.5 strokes per second, and that is about speed contest speed, about on average. And then 5 strokes per second, that's really hard to achieve, and I had to achieve that in order to make my world record at 360 words a minute, combined with writing very short. So what I want you to keep in mind here is 3 strokes a second is a fast student, 4 strokes a second, fast reporter, and 5 strokes a second, very fast reporter. So back to our tower picture here, I'm going to put a book that represents a student that basically learns to do 1 stroke per second, and they're probably, depending on theory, going to be able to write between 50 and 70 words per minute. As they gain speed, we can add a second book. And the second book brings them closer to the top of the tower, and this is 2 strokes per second, and they're definitely climbing here. Then, after they've been in school quite a while, they can get to 3 strokes per second, and they are well more than halfway up to where they need to be at 225 words per minute. Now at this point I want to point out that this is if you're writing a super stroke intensive theory with no briefs. Basically no briefs, you're writing everything out. That's what's going on here in my word pictures so far. So here we are with a picture of a stroke-intensive theory where the student has become a fast student, and yet it hasn't brought them anywhere near the top. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add a 4th book. And this 4th book represents fast court reporter speed, 4 strokes per second. So if a student goes fast court reporter speed at 4 strokes a second, but is using a stroke-intensive theory with no briefs, they are still not going to be fast enough to get to 225, which is just at the top of this tower here. But now let's take this scenario farther. Let's assume that this imaginary student can do not only 4 strokes per second, but actually practices so hard that they can do 5 strokes per second. Here they go. They finally have achieved their goal, and they've gone above 225, probably to about 235 or 240. This gives them a little leeway and allows them to pass tests and become a professional court reporter. Barely. But now let me take it a little farther. We've got our imaginary student with 5 strokes per second, having gone past 225, and The number of people that can do 5 strokes per second on a sustained basis, I do not mean just for a little while, just for 10 seconds or 4 seconds or something. I mean sustaining it for at least a minute. That's what I mean when I talk about finger speed. For them to be able to do 5 strokes per second, I'm guessing that maybe only 1 in 1,000 court reporters can hold that speed. And in fact, I was not one of those until I went for my world record. And then after I stopped practicing for the world record, I was no longer one of those. And on this particular day, I am not a 5 stroke per second person where I can sustain it accurately. I'm a 4.5 stroke per second and 4 as far as accuracy goes. So but this particular student has made it to 5 strokes a second, which allows them to pass. That is extremely difficult. And I'm, again, speculating that 1 out of 1,000 court reporters can achieve this speed. Not students, but court reporters. So now let's imagine a 6th book. The 6th book allows them to go 6 strokes per second, something I've never done accurately in my life unless I'm writing, "Now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of their country." I can write that at 6 strokes a second. But anything else, I cannot sustain it at all. So this allows the person to get possibly to 280 or even higher at 6 strokes per second, but their fingers are flying, and I would suggest that maybe only 1 in 20,000 or 1 in 50,000 court reporters can accurately achieve 6 strokes per second, or at least have accurately achieved that. As far as can, I believe we can. I believe I could with enough practice, but I sure haven't yet. So I haven't proven that. So now let's take these books away. We'll remove some of them and go back to an early level student. Let's go to a student that has 2 strokes per second, and this student right here does not use any briefs. At this point, I'm going to push in 3 different colored books, and these 3 books represent all the briefs that Mark Kislingbury uses. That means lots of briefs and phrases, a whole bunch of them. And if you can learn as many or as few of these as you want, and it will cause you to gain speed. So let's look what happens. You add 1/3 of the briefs that Mark Kislingbury uses, and it automatically gives you more speed. You now add 2/3 of the books that I use, of the briefs that I use, and you get more speed. Now, if you learn to write as short as I do, look at this. You've got a person with 2 strokes per second who is getting close to getting out of school. Now, the numbers and the math are not exact on this, but they're generally correct. So watch what happens if a person just does a moderate number of briefs, 1 book. They've got 1 book for a moderate number of briefs, and then they add more finger speed. So this is the 3rd finger speed, 3 strokes a second, and they add a 4th finger speed, 4 strokes a second. They now have the speed of a professional reporter. They have a moderate number of briefs, which is 1/3 of the amount I use. They are now a professional reporter. They just barely hit 225, barely. But they can probably pass it after a few tries and go out into the working world and basically thrive as a court reporter, but they will always be challenged with their speed. If they could add maybe not a 5th book, because few people can write that fast, but maybe they can add half of a 5th book, then they can give themselves some cushion on finger speed. Or they might come to the Magnum Steno Club and shorten their writing even more and get another 1/3 of the briefs that Mark Kislingbury uses. This would give them a huge buffer and push them up to the 260, 270 range, if not 280. And last but not least, if they add the final book of briefs to where they write as short as I do, this now pushes them over 280. At this point, I'm going to add a new block to the tower. This block, the top of it, represents 360 words a minute. Here is 225, and here is 360. Notice that if you have 4 strokes per second on top of 3 brief books, you now have pushed well into the 300s. And now if you add 1 more book to give yourself 5 strokes per second, that will push you to barely above 360, basically 370. And this is what I did to accomplish the world record. The Guinness Book of World Record fastest court reporter designation, where I wrote 360 words for 1 minute and transcribed with 97.22% accuracy, making 10 errors. This gave me a basic top speed of 370, and so I was able to pass the 360. Why? Because I got my finger speed to 5, and I had all these briefs which added speed. So let's look at this once more. We'll add 1 book for someone starting with a stroke intensive theory, but then they train themselves with my theory, my complete theory, and all my briefs. So they already have a huge edge with these briefs. Then they add their second finger speed book for 2.0 strokes per second, and they are already almost out of school. 3 strokes per second puts them way over the top. 4 strokes per second puts them well into the 300s. 5 strokes per second puts them at 370. And look, what if they were one of those rare individuals who could add the 6th book? This would put them well into the 400s, probably in the 430 range or better. This is humanly possible. So are you sitting there right now trying to get to 225 at 3 strokes per second and struggling and wondering why? Well, if you contact me, I would have told you you need to shorten your writing with lots of briefs. And so as you do that, you would add 1 book of briefs, which would really put you closer, even without any increased finger speed. And if you even do more, 2 books of briefs will put you over the top, or pretty close. And the 3rd book of briefs will put you real high. But let's not make you have to write as short as I do. That took a lot of work. Let's just have you write 2/3 as short as I do, and then get the 4th book of finger speed. That puts you well above 225, puts you in at least the 260 range, and you are a comfortable fast reporter, and all you did is learn 2/3 of the briefs that Mark has learned. So, is this you? 3 strokes a second, working hard on a stroke intensive theory, but there's a bunch of briefs over here in the Magnum Steno book and elsewhere that you just haven't learned yet? Well, it's time to learn them. It's time to pull them into your mind and put them on your pile. And as you do so, you get closer and closer to the top. And then, using my high-speed methods of practicing, which gets your fingers faster, you go way over the top, and you now not only do 225, but you do 260. I hope you enjoyed this video and that it was a good picture for you. This demonstration supports the 2 pillars of the Magnum Steno Club, which say, write short and practice at high speeds. Have a good day.